I would like to get the minutes from March 9th approved. You all should have a copy of it. So do I hear a motion on the approval of March 9th?
Thank you. I move that we approve the minutes from both March 9th and also March 14th.
Seconded by Representative Neighbor, right? Okay. All right, so we're approving both March 9th and March 14th minutes as one here. All four, please respond by saying yes. Any opposed, nay? Let the minutes reflect. Minutes are approved by both. First up, we're going to have an informational briefing from Atmos Energy by Bart Armstrong, who is the president. Bart, you have the floor, sir. Welcome to the committee. There should be a button on that mic. Go ahead and turn it on.
Good.
Is it lit up?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, thank you for that. Well, I appreciate the invitation, the opportunity to be here this morning. And I know y'all got a full agenda, and I also know I'm the last of the utility company. So I'll try to be brief and not be redundant with some of my comments, but just a couple of updates and some highlights. And then if leave the opportunity, if y'all got any questions or whatever for me. So, yeah, I'm Bart Armstrong with Atmos Energy. Been with Atmos for about 30 years. Been in Kansas, live right down the road in Olathe. Been there for about 15 years. About half my career now I've been in Olathe, Kansas, and absolutely love it, and proud to be here. So the first slide, I'll just kind of walk through briefly. Just talk a little bit about Atmos as a whole. And Atmos is a natural gas only gas distribution company. So we're not a dual utility, just natural gas utility. And we deliver safe, reliable, affordable energy to about 3.1 million customers in about 1,400 communities. And we're in 8 states and 6 different divisions. And I really just kind of bring that up because it's kind of nice to know that you're part of a larger corporate structure. So you've got the support from some subject matter expertise when you need that, purchasing power, and even resources if we were to need it. And we've provided help in other areas, and we certainly have had that in our areas where we've needed resources. We've got 4,700 employees all moving in the same direction, doing the same thing, look the same, drive the same trucks. And so we've got a lot of resources available. Talk a little bit about Kansas specifically. So we serve just a little over 140,000 customers here in Kansas. We're 106 communities, and we have about 164 employees roughly in that number. Now, if you look at our footprint in there, Olathe is our largest, the biggest concentration of customers and employees. We serve a little bit of Lenexa, a little bit of Overland Park, Shawnee Mission, Kansas City, Kansas. So Olathe area is our biggest concentration. Kind of go around the state. Independence, Kansas, down in the southeast part of the state, that's our second largest plant. But in between that, we serve out by Council Grove, Harrington, Yates Center, out west in Anthony, Ness City, and Johnson City. So we're kind of spread out, very similar to some of the other utilities you heard about. We've got some very rural and then some very concentrated areas like in the Olathe area. And this slide really just kind of represents some of our giving, some of the things that we and our employees do. And look at the 328,000. That's just the charitable giving that we do. And our 3 main focus is really focus on the kids hunger and children needs, heroes, firefighters, emergency responders, and law enforcement. And then just what we call our neighbors. And it's just the energy assistance. And I'll talk a little bit about it in another slide later. The next slide, this is kind of one of those I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. I think y'all understand that, and I'll save us some time. But this really just kind of illustrates from a utilities perspective, the LDC, we're that blue part in the middle. We're not midstream, we're not production, we're not transmission. We're just the gray meter at your house. That's Atmos, and as some of the other utilities. So just talk about that. We've got about 4,100 miles of pipe that we maintain. Skip to the next slide. Again, kind of similar. So that shows kind of where we're at. The main out in front, the service, whether it's a service in the meter set or a meter set at the property line, and that's what we're responsible for in general. So just talk about that a little bit. One of the things I will talk about too is our system integrity project, our SIP. That's our accelerated replacement program that we're replacing old pipe, vintage pipe, modernizing the system, and those blue pipe out front. That's kind of what we're talking about. You know, the technology and the method of installation in our industry has come a long way since we first began installing pipe, and using the new high-density polyethylene pipe lasts much longer. Certainly, you know, you hear about bare steel, and there are certainly needs for bare steel, high pressure, large volume, wrapped, protected bare steel. There's steel, but the majority of the pipe we install today is high-density polyethylene. That's what you see mostly, probably. Switch to the next slide. This one just talks a little bit about our regulators. You know, the PHMSA being from the federal, you know, they're the ones that provide guidelines and rules of operation. American Pipe Institute, they promote and recommend a lot of equipment, material types. OSHA, we're all familiar with OSHA, workplace safety. And then the EPA, the environmental, we certainly work within their guidelines. But the biggest one that we work with is the KCC, and even things such as the GSRs, which I've heard about, Gas Safety Reliability Surcharge. It's a safety and a replacement program that was legislated. KCC kind of administers that. So it all kind of ties together. Several key stakeholders being those. And we certainly comply and it meet or exceed certainly all these safety standards. The next slide talked a little bit about, we believe and have known for a long time that natural gas is extremely efficient, somewhere around 91% efficient from the wellhead to the burner tip. We've been delivering gas safely to customers for a long time. This just means that it's a great value for Kansans who choose this fuel for their homes and businesses. We work throughout the year to maintain, monitor the system, to be ready to deliver gas when it's extremely cold, such as we saw a couple of months ago, 2 years ago during Winter Storm Uri. I won't go through all that either. I know y'all talked a lot about that. Those tested everybody's systems a little bit, and we came through it extremely well, certainly at atmosphere in Kansas as well. Natural gas continues to be the fuel choice to heat homes, especially in the colder climates, as we've talked about. As a direct use product for our customers, it's certainly the most efficient. The next slide talked a little bit about just in addition to safety, you know, ensuring the integrity of our system serves in another important role, which is being good stewards of our environment. And I know you've heard others talk about that as well, and we're certainly doing a lot of different stuff to do the same. Atmos is committed to clean energy future and working across the company to reduce emissions with a commitment to reduce these emissions by 50% by the year 2035. Now, that date started in 2017, so 2018 would have been the year we started doing that. If you kind of ask how we do that, it's replacing aging infrastructure, leak repair, leak reduction, using more modern technology from the measurement side and installation practices. So there's a lot of different stuff we're doing. You've heard them discussed around advanced leak detection. And so there's many ways that we're doing that to reach that goal. Certainly our pipeline replacement efforts, partnering again with some really amazing cool technology that I kind of talked about. The next slide is really talking about our environmental strategy again. And over the past few years, we put together an environmental strategy focused on reducing environmental impacts from our operations, and are focused on our 5 primary areas: operations, fleet, customer end use, and gas supply. I'll touch on those just a hair before we leave that slide. So the operations is really kind of what I talked about: system modernization, replacing aging infrastructure. Kind of go around the circle of the fleet. CNG, we've got CNG, compressed natural gas vehicles that we use for our own fleet, but we've got UPS and we've got other companies that are doing the same, waste management. So we've got those internally for the hybrid vehicles and compressed natural gas. Our buildings, you know, we've got 15 LEED, which is Leadership in Energy Environmental Design. You've heard of the LEED buildings, and we've got 2 more that are being constructed now across the entire enterprise. And then gas supply. I know others have talked a little bit about a carbon offset. We've got it's called the Smart Choice Program. Same thing, voluntary program for customers if they want to participate in that. It's just a carbon offset, which simply you're just buying credits against projects in other areas to offset the greenhouse gas emissions. So, and then the customer end use, you know, our demand side management, promotion of energy efficiency. So those are really the 5 big areas that we're kind of focused on as far as our environmental strategy. The next slide just kind of talks about, and I think I've mentioned this last time I was here maybe, and we actually had what they're calling a nail drive event for our Zero Net Energy Home. It was scheduled for a couple of weeks. I think weather's postponed us a little bit, and we're getting there. We'll get there eventually, but we're very close to having some walls up. So Zero Net Energy Home is simply just that. It's a home that produces more energy than it actually consumes, and it's really bringing the best of all the energy together, the wind, solar, renewables, natural gas, and all, and the home actually produces more energy than it consumes. And this is really, greenhouse emissions, maintaining affordable energy bills. That's a big deal about the Zero Net Energy. And then we're partnering with Habitat Humanity. And we've got one in Evans, Colorado, that we've already completed, and this will be our second one in our division. So more to come on ZNE. And then the last slide, really just, at Atmos, I mean, really the foundational, we call them non-negotiables. You could ask all 4,700 employees what a safe community, non-negotiable. We do it every time. We don't compromise. We don't not do it. So we start our meetings with safety moments. So I thought I'd share this with you. Got Gus and Rosie. Those are our two representatives. Gus for safe digging, call 811. I know I mentioned that to him, and Rosie just reminds us if you smell natural gas, call us. So thought I'd share Gus and Rosie a little bit with you, and then I would certainly be remiss if I didn't show you the last slide that's Frank, one of our employees. And so we get to have Frank on there, and it's really, our feeling safe and thriving communities. Again, everything with us really does start with safety, and that means within the communities, pipeline safety, public safety, system safety, and employee safety. So we really talk about it a lot, and that's one of our employees holding one of our signs. We spend a lot of time in the communities doing that and promoting safety. So I think that's all the prepared remarks. I could have spent some more time on some of those, but again, I know y'all are Chairman. You'd asked if I could be quick, and I can talk pretty darn fast.
No, appreciate you being here.
Yes, sir.
Committee, do we have questions for Mr. Armstrong? Representative Neighbor.
I know you've lived in Olathe, but where did you come from? Because you've got a southern accent.
Lubbock, Texas. I wasn't born in Olathe.
My dad lived there for 30 years.
Is that right?
I knew it was.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You say you have 4,000 miles of pipeline and, you got to replace it. Now, being natural gas, does it have to be steel or is it can be plastic pipeline?
It can be both. The majority of our system is probably intermediate pressure. There's high pressure, there's intermediate, and there's low pressure. If we replace something today, we'd replace it the majority of the time with a high density polyethylene pipe, the yellow pipe you see sticking out of the ground most of the time. But there are occasions and there are applications where steel pipe, high pressure, or really large volume customer, high steel wrapped, cathodically protected pipe, we still install it occasionally.
And one more, if I could, your average savings for a home that has gas is $1,000. And, we keep talking about going all electric, but my home has both. And I just don't know how you can go all electric when every home can save $1,000. I mean, that's a bunch.
It is. And those are EI numbers. Those aren't something we just kind of came up with on our own. Those are reportable, presentable, and factual numbers. And, we certainly believe in our product. We know it's a great product. It's safe and it's affordable. But we also support not eliminating any energy source, but the best that everybody's got. And that's kind of what's represented in our Zini homes. But you're right. I mean, certainly I work for the gas company and I believe in our product. And the numbers show it is affordable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Okay, just a quick one here. You're talking about the updated technology and polypropylene pipes. Will that be okay? And is there plans in your future for any natural gas / hydrogen mix going through the pipes?
Right now that as it evolves, I'm sure we'd consider anything. We don't have that in our short or even long-term plans. We're still a gas company, and that's kind of what we're promoting and believing that's going to be a part of the long-term solution. I know there's a lot of discussion around hydrogen, but I also think there's a long way from it being put in our pipes. We're still a gas company, and we're going to operate that way, and that's kind of where we're at right now.
All right, good, fair question. So, and
Yes,
I've got friends in Slayton. You ought to know right where
I
that's
know exactly where that's at.
There you go. So appreciate you being here.
Thank y'all. I appreciate it.
There's no other questions, is there? I'm sorry, Representative Schleen-Siepen.
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask, in reaching the 50% reduction goal, what kind of technology are you using for, say, methane?
So, we've been testing in some areas we use it. It's advanced mobile leak detection. It's just where today our equipment's about 1 part per million. This is 1 part per billion. So it's extremely sensitive. Some of the measurement equipment used, so I'll give you an example. We call them no bleed or low bleed. And it's just a measurement device that just lets a little bit of gas out as it's measuring. We've eliminated those to no bleed. So that's eliminated methane reduction. The installation of pipe, the way that we purge, recapture natural gas. So in the old days, you kind of purge the system and basically let gas controlled out of the air to get the air out of the line. You're basically purging the air out. We recapture that gas now, so it's not released in the atmosphere. So there's a lot of different things, and certainly replacing aging infrastructure that may have leakage attached to it, eliminating those leaks, replacing it with new modern high density polyethylene. So those are a few of the methods. Yes, sir.
Any other questions? All right. We thank you for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. With that, committee, I'd like to now open the hearing on Senate Bill 49. If I could get the reviser to give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, committee, as you all know, Senate Bill 49 deals with the lighting systems on top of wind energy turbines. So, the bill would require new construction, new wind energy facilities to apply to the FAA to have a light mitigating technology system installed. So currently, most wind energy facilities have the synchronous blinking lights on top that blink at night. These light mitigating technology systems, the only ones that are approved by the FAA right now are aircraft detection systems. So when an aircraft gets into the area of the wind turbines and the wind energy conversion system, those lights would kick on and do the synchronous blinking. And then once the aircraft leaves the area, those lights turn off. So the first part of the bill, as I said, for new construction, new facilities, the owner, operator, developer of those new facilities would be required to apply to the FAA for the installation of that type of system on the new facility. If the FAA approves of that lighting system, there's a requirement in the bill that it be installed within 24 months of the FAA's approval. The bill also looks back and makes some changes to retroactive, has a retroactive application. So wind energy conversion systems, the existing ones that are in the state, beginning January 1 of 2026, those facilities would have to start applying to the FAA for these same types of light mitigating technology systems upon a certain trigger. So the trigger for that is upon the execution of a long-term power offtake agreement. So these wind energy conversion systems that are existing in the state, they have agreements, power purchase agreements, long-term power agreements to offload that power, sell the power. And once those agreements come up for renegotiation, that would be the trigger as when the facility has to apply to the FAA to essentially retrofit the facility to install a light mitigating technology system. And power offtake agreement is defined in the bill. It's defined, as I said, a long-term contract that provides for any provision of the capacity from the wind farm or the output, or for the differences or a financial hedge that's tied to the output. So essentially anything that's tied to the production of energy from the system. So new facilities got to apply. Prior facilities have to apply upon that trigger time. If for some reason, the Senate added a provision, if for some reason there's a delay and a county and the people within the county wish to speed up the process for the installation of one of these systems, let's say a power offtake agreement isn't going to happen for another 10 years or so, there's a provision in the bill that allows a county to issue revenue bonds to finance the purchase and the installation costs of a light mitigating technology system, of a wind system in their county. Now, of course, that would have to come with some negotiations with the owner of that wind energy system, between the owner and the county. The bill provides that if a light mitigating technology system is required to be installed pursuant to the provisions of the bill, the vendor of that light mitigating technology system, so the aircraft detection radar vendor, would have to provide notice to the Kansas Department of Transportation Aviation Division about kind of just a notice about the implementation and the presumed installation date of the system. Now, as I said, they have a 24-month window to get these systems installed once they get approval from the FAA. If for some reason the installation takes longer than 24 months, the vendor of that light mitigating technology system would have to start providing notice to the ks.gov aviation division every 3 months to provide updates on the reasons for the delay and the status of the installation of the lighting system. The bill, kind of some final pieces, the bill would provide, except if it was financed by the county, that any costs that are associated with the installation of a lighting system would be borne by the owner, operator, or developer of the wind energy system. And one final thing, this would apply for wind energy conversion systems or turbines that are 50 feet or taller and 5 or more within the turbine system or the wind energy system. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee has on that.
Committee questions. First off, Representative Roth.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the 50 feet or taller, is that 50 feet from the top of the blades or 50 feet from the top of the tower post?
So I don't believe the bill doesn't specify the exact measurement, but I think the industry standard there, and folks behind me will correct me if I'm wrong, is to measure from the top of the blade to the bottom of the tower.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nick. Nick, long-term agreements. You say that if they have a long-term agreement, they don't have to put these on until that agreement is up.
That is correct. The trigger for that, the existing systems, is a new long-term power agreement being executed or renegotiated type of thing. And
I don't quite understand, if the county wants it quicker, then the county will pay for part of it. Now, does the county own part of the windmill system? Why would they pay for part of it?
Well, and this isn't a requirement, so that it's an option for counties to issue revenue bonds to pay for part of it. But it would be if the county wants to speed up that installation process. Let's say that a long-term power purchase agreement isn't going to be renegotiated for that facility for 15 years. And if the residents of that county want to petition their county commissioners to negotiate to get that type of lighting system on sooner, this provides an option for the county to finance that system and get it on a little sooner.
Thank you. And one more, if I could. If these windmills are trying to get these on the top to work, and they don't quite have it done by their respective date, there's no penalty. They just got to let people know, hey, we're working on it, we're coming, but there's no penalty involved with it.
There is no penalty. It does say install within 24 months after that FAA approval. But then again, like as I said, the bill does contemplate with the notice to ks.gov aviation that there could be delays associated with that installation.
How close does the plane have to get to turn that on?
That's a good question. We had some presentations on that on the Senate side about how those exactly work, and maybe some folks behind me might be able to help me out with that one.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative O'Hobson.
Thank you, Nick. This only applies to aircrafts, or is any flying object around the area?
So that's another great question. It's for detecting aircraft, but I know that
those helicopters. Someone from their private who has a private helicopter flying over. Does that apply?
Yes.
To this?
Yes. So anything like that in the sky, should kick the lights on.
What about in the situation whereby you have a hot air balloon? Does that also in here as well? A situation like that.
That's another good question. And the radar, the folks who do these radar systems, I think there's currently 2 vendors that can be used for these radar activated systems. But the folks with expertise in that area would be able to answer if hot air balloons would pick up and kick the lights on type of thing. I don't know that right now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have a couple quick questions for you, Nick. has this bill been over on the Senate side? Was it amended or compromised, or what are we dealing with here?
So, yes, it was amended. So this bill, there was a interim committee set up by the Senate, composed of senators, looking at this issue. Had a whole one-day hearing, and there's a whole interim committee report on it. A lot of good information in there about these systems and how they operate. It started off as two separate bills, one to go prospective for the new wind energy facilities, one to go retroactive for the existing facilities. The Senate committee decided to combine those two ideas. There were some, I think, some agreements between industry representatives as to how the compromise would be set up. And then we're kind of at this point right now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So through the original bills, if it was required to do a retroactive, does that get into constitutional issues or other statutes?
The thing I would point to there is, and I think we heard some of this in that interim Senate committee. There's another state. I mean, there's a precedent for going retroactive. I think North Dakota is a state that we looked at that has done, and they set a hard and fast deadline of existing wind energy facilities. You have to, I think it was sometime in 2019, you have to install these types of lighting systems, or else. And I saw that the Public Utilities Commission of North Dakota ended up issuing some fines to some wind energy owners who didn't comply with that hard and fast deadline. So there's some precedent there. I don't know what types of legal issues they ran into with that. But this is just that triggers that power offtake agreement type of thing.
Okay. And then the power purchase agreements that you mentioned, what's the typical length of those? Are they 5 years, 10 years, 20?
Yeah, we heard some information on that, and I'd let the folks behind me kind of speak to that. They'll know the best on that thing.
All right. Any other questions for the reviser? Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it. We've got 9 presenters this morning. I'm asking you to keep your presentation to around 3 minutes, just because trying to get through it all might be a little lenient on that, but please try and keep it to that guideline if you could. First off, do we have Senator Mike Thompson in the room? Okay, so we do not. Do we have Senator Elaine Bowers in the room?
Start our conversation. So
welcome. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
That was Mike coming in now. So good morning, everyone. I'm Elaine Bowers. I live in Cloud County, Senate District 36, and we do have 4 wind farms in operation, 1 under construction in Cloud County Community College that teaches wind tech programs, 1 and 2 year programs, very successful. So I come from the part of the state that does have a lot of wind, and this has been a topic around here for the last couple years. I was appointed chairman of a Senate Select Committee on wind turbines over the summer, and I'm going to speak to what we did in our committee, how we scoped this out. So it was a day-long committee, and we focused on these topics. We began with the Kansas Electrical Transmission Authority and the history of incentives for wind development in Kansas. The KCC and Aviation Department of KDOT testified on a state level. Then we had input from federal officials from Southwest Power Pool, Department of Defense, the Federal Aviation Administration, to have a look at this on the national level. We heard testimony from the National Conference of State Legislators, NCSL, who discussed other states' laws and legislative efforts, and then from state officials, including a senator from Colorado and the North Dakota Public Service Commission, each bringing a different perspective on laws and regulations. One moving forward with prospectively only, and one moving with mandating the existing turbines already. So we heard 2 different sides. Then we learned about the newest technology from the Aircraft Detection Lighting System, ADLS, manufacturers, and the overall national conversation with these trends with these firms. We've reviewed previous bills introduced on last legislative sessions, and even the roles of local government with siting and procedure currently in the state. And finally, we heard from the wind industry members and wind companies who are wanting and needing to be community partners with development, both future and farms in operation now. And we'll have those folks behind us to talk about their position on this. So 2 bills came out of this process, one moving forward, one looking backwards. One was Senate Bill 46, one was 49, which you have in front of you. There was a strong consensus to do something with future new construction and with the positive backing of the wind industry. But the most important aspect of this, for the retroactive piece, was to find a trigger, if you will, an action that would not be punitive to existing farms and contracts while addressing the desire of communities to turn off the lights when aircrafts are not in the area. And it's a wonderful story of how peers, even from across our nation, where this idea came from. So Colorado Senator Jerry Sonnenberg in rural northeastern Colorado. So if you look across from my district and Senator Billinger's and then going on to eastern Colorado, this is where he lived. He moved his bill through last year with only on future builds. But he said, in almost as an afterthought as he was chatting with us on WebEx, he wished he had done something that he hadn't offered the committee, and it was the power purchase agreement, which basically is a new contract when electricity is sold. And a new company can, and often does happen before the original contract's been fulfilled. So this new agreement then is the trigger, if you will, so a prompt. So the prompt to add the new lighting without breaking the contract or being punitive, or a mandate to the existing turbines and wind farms that are already up, but allowing new still at the time of construction. So those 2 bills were combined. We had several meetings with stakeholders, legislators, and this balance was agreed upon. It is a compromise by each side. However, it truly is important to note that the newest farms are under a 20-year contract, which seems very far away from the people who would like to see the lights turned off sooner. So I offered the amendment for the local county funds to be used. So if you think pilot funds, the gift that comes in lieu of tax to the counties, that they knew that they had permission to use these funds if they wanted to move quicker. So there again, it's local control issue to me. The local county commissioners voted to allow the farms to come in. They should be able to allow the citizens to have a conversation with them if they'd like to use their funds to start this process sooner. The bill passed on February 23rd, the vote at 39-1. And so there's lots of people behind me who can touch on the process through the years and dealing with the blinking lights. That's just what we call them. I do want to mention the hard work of our revisers and researchers on our day-long committee. So you have both of them in here, Nick and Lindsay, help pull together the successful meeting and the agenda, and all the people who had conversations through the years on bringing this idea to us before. We would be the first state to do this. It is looking like it could be a pathway forward to other states on how you deal with not being punitive to the farms that are out, but moving forward with a very popular idea to turn off the lights if they're not needed in a safe way. So this is my presentation, Chairman Leo, and there's a lot of people who are more experts in this field than I am, but I am happy to have a try at questions if.
Are just asking, are you guys, the senators here, do you need to get to another meeting? Because I could hold questions.
Not us, we're on the same committee, but perhaps Senator Thompson should go next, and then both of us answer questions if that's.
Yeah, that's fine.
Good for you. Yes, thank you.
Thompson up then if is he here? I don't think he's here yet. Okay, let's not bring Senator Thompson up then.
Well, we'll watch for him to come in because he has worked on this issue for a number of years, and having public comments from the last couple years, we didn't have public comments in our select committee meeting, but we knew what they felt. Yeah. And so this is an attempt to move this forward. I had a colleague years ago in the House, and this is my 17th year here. He said, what's the worst that could happen if this bill didn't pass? It stays the same. And I don't think the answer in Kansas, when we have this pathway forward, if we can do this, it won't stay the same. And I think that's an important piece. Okay. If this is why this is needed, because if we don't pass this, the lights stay on. for the people in the concentrated area where the farms are in particular.
Okay. Committee, is there questions for Senator Bowers at this time? Not seeing anything.
Thank you,
Elaine,
Chairman.
here.
I don't know if
I
this
didn't
is,
see you there.
I understand these lights are a nuisance. I'm curious if there's some kind of environmentally significant aspect to this as well. Often migration patterns of birds and other creatures are affected by luminosity, and so I'm just curious whether that was part of the conversation. And second of all, I'm just going to throw this out there for whoever wants to answer this. It seems to me that aside from blinking lights being a nuisance, there's also aviation security that's raised by this. Guide wires are a big problem for antennas too, for aircraft. I was having a discussion with someone in the room about this yesterday. And I wonder with the lighting technology today, whether the same kind of technology couldn't be applied to guide wires so that they all light up when aircraft are in the area so that they can see a usually invisible danger. That's not part of this bill, I realize it, but I at least want to kick it out there for consideration.
Well, and I believe the wind energy folks could answer the environmental concerns, because we did hear some of that as well. And our main focus is if we don't need these lights on, then that's turn them off. And it seems to be a very popular idea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a Mr. Jen Kursavati here? Take it away, Josh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, members of the committee. I am Joshua Swati. I am here on behalf of Kimberly and then the Advanced Power Alliance. It's a pleasure to be back in front of the committee on which I spent my most time when I was in the House. And I would be the first person to say that even when the Senate passes something 39-1, just with the House even breathing on that bill, it makes it just a little bit better. So you can improve on that by taking a look at it this morning. But the Advanced Power Alliance, the Kansas Power Alliance, does stand in support of Senate Bill 49. And as the senator mentioned, as she was giving the history of this comes from the discussion in committee last year on the Senate side, and then that special committee that met outside of the legislative session to discuss this. But I want to kind of address some of the questions that were asked earlier in an effort to answer those as I go through this testimony. First and foremost, it's important to understand the wind industry is not the entity that decides the red blinking lights to go on the top of the wind towers. That is determined by the Federal Aviation Administration, and that is 100% about the safety of people in the air. And so, Representative, you were asking about, would this apply to hot air balloons? Would this apply to helicopters? The FAA is the federal agency that is in charge of making sure that anybody in the air is safe. And so they determine on a tower by tower basis how these lighting systems operate. And they would not approve a system, whether it's the blinking lights that we currently have or the ADLS system that is beginning to be approved. They would not even approve that as a system that could be installed on these if they did not feel that it would not keep everybody in the air safe. And one of the things that we heard from the two companies that have this technology that apply it is that if anything, they are working out the kinks of having it be too sensitive. It will frequently pick up flocks of geese. And so then it triggers the 30 minutes, and oftentimes those geese land right in the middle of a wind farm. And so they're there for a while, then they take off again. But I think the FAA would even tell you we would prefer that these systems err on the side of being triggered because whether it's a hot air balloon or a helicopter or an airplane, the FAA would not approve it if they did not fully believe that it would keep everybody safe. So that's the impetus behind this. The wind industry, like anybody else, would say we would love to provide a solution to the red blinking lights for our communities. And so when these two pieces of legislation came forward, as was mentioned, the prospective is fairly simple. We make an application for any new projects moving forward. The retrospective was a little more complicated, and part of that reason it's twofold. First of all, the economics of those projects are already set. And so if you ask us to go back and change that on economics that are already built into the project, it's asking us to take on costs that were not accounted for. And on a one-off project, that may not be bad. When you have 44 operating projects in a state, that becomes a very high price tag quickly. That's the first reason. The second reason, and we learned this off of the North Dakota situation, but North Dakota also was not nearly as big a wind state as Kansas is. If you set a date certain, you immediately create a very artificial market, and there are only really two vendors that are offering this technology. And so, in an effort to protect against an immediate run up of costs, because if there's a state law that says you have to install everything by this date certain, then it's very easy to say, oh gosh, our supply chain's been compromised and now it's a lot more expensive. And so making the retroactive built across a system where we do the updates of the long-term power contracts was really the best way to avoid both those situations. And so we worked very closely with the senators. We have a very good product, we believe. And then we would also say, back to this question about other lights, we are certainly not the only blinking lights in the night sky. And if this committee wanted to discuss this in the future, we would certainly say that's a welcome conversation. But I do think the Advanced Power Alliance would say, in terms of this product, we are very proud of the finished product on this. It requires considerable pain on all sides. No one got exactly what they wanted out of the legislation, but we think it's important. And we do think it can serve as a model for the other major wind states, particularly in the middle of the country. And so we would encourage you to move it forward. I'm looking through the notes I had on any other questions. The typical length of a PPA. Those can range generally around 20 years. Sometimes they're 15 years or down to 10 years, but that's generally the range on a power purchase agreement. And with that, I'd stand for questions.
Thank you, Josh. Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. So in this bill, what if the FAA says no? Do they just install the regular lights? And a kind of a connected question, if how long does it take for the FAA to approve or not approve? And in the meantime, what's on the windmill?
Yes. So the question is, what if the FAA says no? And that is important also for your communities. If they think the passage of this immediately means that the ADLS technology is going to be installed, that's not the case. It means that these will make the application to the FAA. The FAA could very well come back and say, no, we want the standard, which is blink on and then a few seconds off and then blink back on. The bill is written so that if, sometimes these projects, depending on how they're engineered, can stretch maybe 15 or 20 miles. If the FAA comes back, because they do determine on a tower by tower basis, they could come back and say, well, these 10 miles, maybe 25 turbines, they're okay. But then these we would prefer to have on all the time. The bill is structured so that you would have to install the ADLS technology on the turbines that the FAA approved, but then also have the FAA the sort of standard lighting system on the others. And sorry, what was the second?
In the meantime, while you're waiting for that approval, do they put on the regular lights? What do they put on?
Yes. And so in the meantime, and that's part of the reason that we had that 24-month window. And then we also have the vendor providing notice to the K.Aviation division. There is the possibility, particularly when you start talking about 44 different projects, that there may be some lag time, and provided everybody is working in good faith, which is not only the assumption, but is sort of written into this law that they would be, there needed to be a provision for what's going on while the system's maybe not entirely up and running. And yes, it would be at the behest of the vendor, who obviously has an incentive to get this installed as fast as possible. So if they don't have it done within 24 months, they need to send a letter to the K.Aviation division saying, here's where we are. This is why it was overrun. This particular part is stuck somewhere overseas and we don't have it. And then in the meantime, yes, it would be the standard FAA lighting system.
Mr. Chair, if I could, go ahead. Got a couple more. What is the, and both of these get to cost, because these cost more than the regular system, and that gets passed on. How much more are these new light systems than the standard just always on?
You are correct. Both of them have cost. Anytime you're building a budget, it's easier to embed those costs. In the overall budget of a new wind farm, these are fairly minimal. As a general rule, it changes based on construction and where you're building these. But as a general rule, if it's like a 2 megawatt tower, it's probably around $4 million per tower to install. So if you have a 200 megawatt project, it's going to cost at least $400 million to build that project. Installing these systems is anywhere from $1 to $2 million, or if it's a complicated system, it may be more than that. That's not a huge amount of the overall budget. But yeah, if you're looking at the 44 retroactive projects, you're upwards of $100 million on installation on those.
And I promise this is my last one, Mr. Chair.
Because we're going to run over. So committee, be prepared.
Okay. Have you, or is your company that you're representing, have they done kind of a timeline of when all those power purchase agreements come up? What I'm getting at is there like going to be one time when all of a sudden like a bunch of wind farms are up and they're all asking at the same time?
That is a great question too, and so we represent the Advanced Power Alliance, which is basically it'd be like the Kansas contractors, the trade group that represents all of them, and those power purchase agreements are proprietary. Those are business confidential, but generally we kind of know when, and you can track it if you look at a calendar of when a lot of these projects were constructed. You'll get a sense of when many of those are going to happen. We are going to see a considerable number in the next 5 years, for sure, that came online toward the end of the 2000s. And then certainly there was a few years gap, and then you'll see another large tranche of them. It's also our anticipation, though, and this is the other reason. Sorry, it was great that this spurred this. This is the other reason that a date certain doesn't work really well. It's our anticipation that 5 years from now, there will be more than just the ADLS technology that's available, that will probably be cheaper and faster to install. We don't know what that is because it really doesn't exist right now, but it will likely exist as more states adopt this. So it could be a situation 5 years from now where everybody adopts it because it almost costs nothing to adopt, but we don't know yet.
Any other questions? Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is fairly quick. Thank you, Josh. I don't know if it'd be you or Joel that comes up later to address this, but typically how long would FAA take to approve a application?
Sorry, that's right. And you asked that too, and I didn't answer that. It is generally a fast turnaround, a matter of months, but also like any federal administration, we tried to build this with enough time just in case it's not a matter of months. But yeah, we have seen, because there are some projects in the state and developers that have already made application for projects that are intending to be built, and they had that response fairly fast.
Absolutely. Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You did say that these will fluctuate with geese.
They can, and there's actually a time period as well. Again, back to this sort of 24-month time period, there's a time period where they calibrate these systems because once they install them, they try to get them set right so that they are doing exactly what they're intended to be doing. But they are going, per the FAA's request and requirement, they're going to be set sensitively because the very last thing the FAA would ever want is to approve a system that ends up being not as safe as they would like it to be.
Well, you want them to detect geese. My husband is a retired airline captain, and it will bring down big airplanes when geese go through an engine. It shreds it. So those little birds are mightier than they look.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We've got to move on to the next one. So appreciate you being here. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I apologize for being late. I was embroiled in working some bills down in the Senate Health. It sounds like there's a lot of things that have already been discussed. I will just tell you that I was intimately involved in negotiating this bill. Actually, the process has taken several years. I think this bill is good because we're taking care of the prospective, the turbines that are yet to come. And of course, the real trick of this was dealing with the retroactive piece, which there's about 4,000 to 4,500 turbines across the state that exist. The older turbines are only a couple hundred feet high, but the newer ones, like up in Republic County, Washington, those areas, we're talking 600, 650 feet tall. And if you've ever driven out along 36 Highway, past Marysville and up in that area, Belleville, it's wall to wall blinking lights. So it's not a single cell tower that happens to be blinking. It is a strobe effect for anybody who has to live there. And so it might be a curiosity for anyone driving by, but for those who have to endure it night after night after night, it's more than just an annoyance. So we came to terms on the virtual power purchase agreement as the trigger mechanism for the retroactive after trying a number of different mechanisms. So with that respect, I am in support of the bill. I'm certainly not here to blow it up. I would ask, though, the committee take a close look at how we allow counties to negotiate with the wind developers to finance a system if they so desire. So that if they could come to terms with that wind company through a funding mechanism, either using the pilot payments that they receive or some other mechanism that gives them the latitude to negotiate this so they can accelerate the timeline of installing these light systems, I think it would be much better, particularly because there are a couple of these larger developments up in northern Kansas. I believe it was Irish Creek and Soldier Creek that have just recently signed these power purchase agreements, and we're talking 10, 20 years. So there's no immediate relief for them. I do like the date certain idea, but it does create some issues with the existing contracts. And so that is one mechanism that we could see getting around it. And with that, I will stand for questions, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any questions for Senator Thompson? Seeing none.
Thank you
for being here, sir.
Thank you.
I'm going to skip down the line a little bit. Looks like we have another senator. Senator Peck, would you like to jump up here? I don't know. I'm assuming you guys probably need to get on your way there, but you've got the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm in the Senate Assessment Taxation Committee. We got a lot of taxes we need to raise over there. So I appreciate it.
That concludes your own.
I am only kidding. I appreciate the sentiment. I don't know what all has been said. I will try to be brief on Senate Bill 49. I thought about it appearing as a neutral. However, the district I represent, this is really important to them. Those constant blinking lights at night are a real issue to the residents that live near these constant blinking lights. Not only do they disrupt sleep for humans and for animals, but some people say it causes many other griefs for them. So if you can imagine the constant strobe effect when you live in a rural area of blinking lights, I know my hands are probably driving you nuts, and I've only done that for just a minute or so. But same way with the constant blinking lights in rural areas. They destroy the night sky, particularly those of us who live rural. We love to see the beauty of a clear, moonlit sky. Well, these lights disrupt that view of a clear, moonlit sky. After passing the Senate, I was a supporter, by the way. I supported. I testified in the Senate committee. I voted for it on the Senate floor. After passing the Senate, I took a closer look at the legislation. I have always felt that the 24-month time frame was excessive. That is pretty long, particularly when you consider the date of January the 21st, 2026. That's 2.5 years from now, plus 2 more years. We're looking at 4.5 years, maybe, before we would provide any relief for citizens who live close. But I would draw your attention to Section 1B as it relates to the date, and then the wording there, a new power offtake agreement. My understanding, which I should have known this, I realized that during the committee time on the Senate side, but this, as you can see, was a committee amendment because of the bolded language. These new power offtake agreements may be 15, 20 years from now. So am I supposed to go back and tell constituents, well, we got this legislation passed, but you may not receive any relief for 15, 20 years or longer. And then once these new power offtake agreements are in place, they have another 24 months. So I would ask that the House correct the Senate. You won't hear me say that very often, correct the Senate bill, because it will go to conference with any changes that you make. And then it can be looked at and gain a full understanding of exactly how this legislation would affect homeowners and those who live in the area. Now, I prefer, honestly, if we were to do this like North Dakota. North Dakota has a hard date of when wind turbines have to have this light mitigating systems installed. I would like for that date to be March 16th, 2023. However, that's today's date in case you haven't looked at the calendar. However, being reasonable, I think January the 1st of 2025, if the House would do that, you would be the heroes of so many Kansans in rural areas by having a hard date that these light systems must be installed. So that would be an ask. And Mr. Chairman, there's a lot more I could say, but I don't know what has been said. I don't want to duplicate too much information that's been said, but by the fact that we have such a long period of time, I think is unacceptable. However, Senate Bill 49 is certainly better than nothing, but honestly, not much better than nothing in its current form.
All right. Committee questions for the senator, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for the presentation. When you say the date on that paragraph 1B, right? On or after January 1st, 2026, you said you want to push that to January 2025. What would be the impact on that for those that are paying for this upgrade? Does it impact them negatively, or how does that move? I don't know enough of the bill.
To begin with, the answer would be yes, it would impact the wind farms negatively. But we're not talking about me or you. We're talking about a corporation, a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I personally don't have any heartburn with asking them to be good neighbors, better neighbors than what they have been. But yes, there would be some cost to the wind energy. They honestly, from my constituents, tell me that they have not been good neighbors. The wind industry has not been. And I'll leave it at that. I can say a lot more, but I will not on that topic.
Any other questions, Representative Neighbor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've heard from some of the other presenters that would really put the companies in a bind because of the time frame. That needed to be there to make sure that the systems were developed and that there were enough workers and things to be able to make this change. Don't you think we need to keep that in mind too, rather than making promises that we might not be able to keep because the availability of workers and all of that wouldn't be accessible?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I appreciate the question, but if the legislature sets a date, I assure you that the wind energy would comply. Of course, they have a little flexibility with the Department of Transportation. But again, I mention that because there is another state, North Dakota, who set a hard date. And I can't really speak for the wind turbine, the wind farms, the wind industry, how much difficulty they would or would not have. But I do believe that it is certainly accomplishable on their part.
One last question. We also heard that there are not near as many wind farms in the Dakotas as there is in Kansas. We're a much windier state. So I would find it hard to compare us with a state that doesn't have the same amount of wind farms to have to accomplish this. Thank you.
I understand that comment, and I appreciate that. And this legislation is not similar to North Dakota at all. So I want you to be clear, committee. I'm not well, I would ask that you do that, but I'm not really expecting that we have a hard date like what North Dakota has. I just believe that, again, the new power offtake agreements, which could be so long from now, there's some adjustments that need to be taken care of in the legislation.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the second time. And thank you, Senator, for the answers. I would definitely be supportive of sending this to conference committee with what you've asked for on the offtake agreement, that language right there. The other question I have, and it may not be something that you know, it might be somebody else. When it comes to the FAA approving this and the compliance, if you will, I think in the bill, as the revisor was talking about, it went through the Kansas Department of Aviation. Is that correct?
I believe it's a federal.
Okay, and that's the biggest question that I'm asking. Does this bill allow for the federal compliance? Do we have a structure in there to make sure that whatever we're putting on is compliant with federal standards in your estimation?
Thank you, Representative, for the question. My understanding is yes, it does need to be a system that's been approved by the Federal Aviation Administration. And then after that time that's approved, so it takes a little while for the approval. And then they have currently 2 years before they actually get the light mitigating system installed and operational. So I'm here advocating for my constituents because of the fact that it is a real issue for anyone who lives close. I personally do not live close, but I've driven by these many times because of the wind farms in my district.
Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here. Question, we look at the options as being a hard date or wait until the purchase power agreement is ended. Did the Senate consider, or the possibility, I'm just thinking of a middle ground, is there possible to reopen the power purchase agreement and amend it for the additional costs to pass those through without waiting until the end and renegotiation? Thank you.
Representative, I appreciate the question. I am not on the Senate Utilities Committee. I was only there for the committee hearing. Same thing as I'm doing here. I went in, gave my presentation, left to go back to another committee. So I do not know what they may or may not have discussed, but that is a possibility that the House may consider.
All right. Any other questions? Senator, I appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you sliding me in at this particular slot so I can go back to the Assessment and Taxation Committee and cut some taxes.
Be gentle on us, sir. Okay. We also have a representative here, Ms. Mosier. You have the floor.
Chairman Delberdang, Vice Chairman Turner, Ranking Minority Leader O'Hobson, and members of the House Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications Committee. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify in support of Senate Bill 49 before you today. I am Lisa Mosier, representative for House District 106, which includes Marshall County, Republic County, Washington County, and Jewell County, which is the hotbed for the new wind farms in the state of Kansas. My husband and I have enjoyed raising cattle and kids together for the last 41 years on our ranch. And our family has now grown to include 3 in-laws and 11 grandchildren. And many of them are at the ranch from day to day doing various jobs. I am an outdoor enthusiast, and I have a profound appreciation for God's creation, earth, sea, sky, and all that is in them. Today, I'd like to share with you how wind has affected us and our neighbors and substantially altered the vista that we have enjoyed for years. A result of this legislation will be to mitigate the constant nighttime blinking of the red lights atop the turbines. A little background. In 2016, Marshall Wind Energy, LLC, finished construction of a small wind system approximately 20 miles due north of our headquarters. The wind turbines there numbered 36. Fast forward to November of 2020, when 120 turbines were powered up in the Soldier Creek wind system around the thriving community of Corning in Nemaha County, approximately 30 miles east of our home and our ranch headquarters. 2021 saw the construction of Irish Creek Wind in Marshall County, where I reside. The southeastern edge of Irish Creek is a mere 4 miles from our home. Its 109 turbines stretch north approximately 9 miles and west about 16 miles. Sitting on the north deck of our home, I see 3 wind farms at night. Red lights blink in various cadences, each wind system having its own unique rhythm of lights. I first learned about the ADLS, the aircraft detection lighting systems, from family in North Dakota, and then doing research with District 106 constituents, one of whom you'll hear from shortly, these past 2 years. I am convinced that installing ADLS lighting systems on the wind turbines would aid in the restoration of natural twilight and nocturnal beauty to all who currently experience the distraction of red blinking lights in the evening and night sky. We see the towers all day. To restore the night sky with the moon and the stars undisturbed in their beauty would be a momentous gesture of goodwill by the wind companies, and would benefit thousands of Kansans who live inside the footprint of and under the noticeable umbrella of all existing wind systems in Kansas. Pending approval of ADLS applications by the FAA, sorry, I'm a rancher, so FFA just rolls off my tongue. Pending approval of the ADLS applications by the FAA, timely retrofitting of lighting systems on existing turbines should occur as soon as upgrade plans are finalized. Maintenance of said lighting systems should be the responsibility of the wind company. Wind systems have come online in different years, and I acknowledge that, necessitating potentially different upgrading processes based on the age of the turbines, because the turbines that were put in 2016 are much different from the ones from 2019, and even different yet from the ones in 2020 in Marshall County, and the ones going up in Republic County are even different beyond that. Initial upgrades to the most recently constructed wind systems will allow greater time to modify processes as needed for upgrading the older farms to the ADLS technology. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I will stand for questions.
Committee, any questions for Ms. Mosier? Representative Berquist.
I know you're not the technical expert, but this question for you or someone else that comes up, and that is, at what altitude can altitude of an airliner going cross country, can that be avoided as far as turning on the lights?
I believe the wind companies can confirm that, but like the 30,000 feet jets you're talking about, they don't have an effect on these lighting systems. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Representative Smith.
But I believe that's 30, 40,000 feet, no worries.
Okay. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Representative. Representative, are you suggesting a hard date? And if you are, what would that hard date be?
I'm here on behalf of my constituents that relief would be appreciated in whatever timely manner can be worked out.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Slane-Sleepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious if someone could give me an idea of what it would cost to retrofit, if that's the right word, all the wind farms in Kansas, or per windmill. I mean, is there a number here of what this system would cost? And maybe I missed it while I was out of the room, for which I apologize if I did. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I can't answer that. I'm not that. I'm just telling you how rural people are being affected by this.
Any other questions? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your testimony. Quick question I have is, if with the relief that Representative Smith was asking for, and I think a previous, the senator was talking about a date certain that backs this up to the date of 2025, I think it is, in accordance with the bill, which says 2026. If they were to do that, what would be the impact on the bill, the negotiation that is going into the bill? I know that a lot of stakeholders have come together. Does it blow up the bill to do that?
It very well might. But, like these last 2 farms that just came online, 20 years is a long time to wait for those lights to go out. I don't know if there's any possibility of an amendment for a mid-year, halfway between when the power purchase agreements are due to come up for whatever that word is. Sorry. I don't know. I just want to convey that it is a real issue for rural Kansas, and if something could be done, it would be appreciated.
And Chair, if I may follow up, and thank you for that. I understand that you're speaking from your heart for your constituents as well. I do know that, you know, there were agreements that have been put in place, and if there's were your issues brought to the table during those phases of negotiations as well?
When Irish Creek was being built, it was suggested to look into the ADLS, but it didn't happen. Now, from what I've heard and what I've read in Republic County, they're going to make application to FAA and pending approval, that farm, which is over 200 turbines, and they're about 600 feet tall, which is way taller than this Capitol building. And they're in a very concentrated area around Cuba, Kansas. So
I'm going to allow one more question. I'm sorry, but Representative Neighbor, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe, and I might need the revisor to correct this, but that there is an option in there for counties to actually appeal this and actually make it sooner. So that option is in here. You don't have to wait 10 or 20 years.
Well, as I understand it, Senator Bauer's amendment was that the county commissioners could either make the decision or put it to a vote of the county to use the funds that the wind systems are appropriating to the counties, and use part of those funds for
well, they could issue bonds. That's what I remember
right.
in the testimony.
Right.
So that option is out there. So
right.
Everybody would not necessarily, I say necessarily, have to wait 15, 20 years. There is a way to get around that if the county so chooses. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. There's a provision that allows the county to issue revenue bonds to finance the costs. Of course, negotiations would have to happen between the county and the wind developer.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. So moving on to Jonathan Sill. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Good morning, everyone. My name's
is your microphone on? Should be a blue light.
Yeah, the blue light or red light? Red light. Okay. Good morning, committee. I'm speaking here today as a proponent for Senate Bill 49. This legislation will require owners of all future and currently commercial operating wind farms to install a form of light mitigating technology. The night sky surrounding the town I live in was forever been tarnished due to the construction of the Irish Creek Wind Farm, owned and operated by NextEra Energy. From dusk till dawn, 108 red aviation hazard lights flash every 3 seconds, and the wind lease on these goes for 90 years. So this is a generational thing where my kids' kids are going to be looking at these lights. The Aircraft Detection Lighting System, or ADLS, is a FAA-approved, safe upgrade so that these lights do not have to be on all the time. This was asked when when Irish Creek was going to be built. NextEra had the opportunity to install these on this facility, but chose not to. I received differing stories as to the reasoning why they were not able to install this system over the years. One was due to military airspace concerns. One was we applied for them and were told no. One was it was an internal decision that we didn't even apply for them. And the last version I was told was we chose not to do this because there is no state statute requiring us to. Now, this is just my story from my corner of Kansas, but imagine how many other stories are out there similar to mine, especially since there are close to 4,000 wind turbines currently operating in the state, with a projected 6,000 more to be built in the coming years. My wife and I intend on staying in the town we live and send our 2 younger children to the school system there, but it saddens me that they will never know what the night sky will look like without the constant flashing of these 108 lights from the wind farm surrounding us. With the passage of this legislation, they will be able to get a glimpse of what the Kansas night sky would look like. Now, while I wholeheartedly agree with the merit of this legislation, I do feel it needs massive improvement to correct its twisting by the wind industry to benefit them over the citizens of Kansas. I'm looking at this committee to make those changes legislation to do so all Kansans can have their night sky back. Some of those improvements to this bill I suggest are not this, but not limited to the return to the original language of the Bowers Amendment, saying that counties may take out revenue bonds or pilot payment monies to pay for an ADLS system, but the installation maintenance will be solely on the wind facility owner. Clause stating that if the county determines that they want an ADLS system on an already existing facility and are willing to pay for it, then the wind facility owner operator shall comply with this request. I mean, the way it's written right now, yeah, we'll pay for it, but the company can just say, no, we don't want to. A hard date to retrofit must be completed by no later than 2026. A real world process that giving the various wind companies time to develop plans to upgrade their facilities, apply the FAA, and if approved, install this technology. A waiver process allow the older facilities where it is not economically viable to upgrade them time or ways to develop newer technologies. A requirement not only to install but to maintain this technology, where it not to work for a period of 6 months, the facility shall cease commercial operation until such time as it has been repaired and back to operational. The authority of this legislation to be set with the county commissioners of the county the facility is located in, to give clear authority to require said facility to cease commercial operations if the wind companies fail to comply. Transparency, include language where all correspondence between the wind company developer, any subcontractors, and the FAA will be given to the county commissioners showing the results of the application process, albeit approved or denied. All facilities that went online within the past 4 years have no choice to wait, but must apply to the FAA immediately to start the process. And a clause stating that if ADLS systems are not permitted by the FAA on the facility, then the facility shall either not be built or rearranged to where it can be. People have already talked about the process that we got here. As I stated earlier, I agree with the merits of this legislation. However, I cannot in good conscience let you vote on it without knowing some of the events leading up to where we are now. SB 49 is the fourth piece of legislation that looks to regulate the wind industry. HB 2273 4 years ago dealt with setbacks and the siting of these massive turbines. There were 19 citizens and 2 groups in favor of that legislation. In opposition, there were 10 citizens and 31 groups. That bill died in committee. SB 279 3 years ago, another bill aimed at all the issues surrounding wind turbines with lighting included in that. This bill died in committee, but there was a very large call for turnout. There were 75 citizens in one group in favor, and there were 24 citizens and 24 groups against it. 478 last year, the bill whose sole purpose was to deal with this lighting issue. There were 20 proponents, all private citizens, and 4 opponents. Of those, there were mainly power companies, wind lobbyists, and the corporations.
Mr. Sale.
Yes, sir.
I hate to do this. I've got to cut you off. We are running out of time, and I've still got more proponents that need to come up here too.
Okay.
But we do have your written testimony.
Yes, sir. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Committee, we're going to hold the questions until the rest of them get through. So thank you. I hate to do that. Next up is Zach. And if you could please try and keep it around 3, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Committee. Zach Pastora on behalf of the Kansas Sierra Club will keep it brief. Just in the spirit of March Madness, we think this legislation is a slam dunk. The 39-1 in the Senate. I don't think we should mess around with this too much. It was supported overwhelmingly. It offers a win-win for the communities that host the wind farms. The wind industry accommodated these concerns and worked with stakeholders, legislators to get this to this point. I think we passed this legislation responding to the environmental concerns. A representative of the Audubon Kansas testified that this would probably have a slight positive impact on wildlife concerns. So we don't see any downside of this legislation. In fact, we think that this is a good example of industry trying to accommodate for the concerns of the community. So I'll leave it there. If there's any questions, we have to answer.
I sure appreciate that. Next up is Jackie.
I'm not going to try my last name, huh?
I knew I was going to butcher it.
It's Garagiola now, and so I apologize. A little harder than Newland, but got married this year, so got to stick with it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for allowing me to testify today in support of SB 49. Like I said, I'm Jackie Garagiola, and I am representing the Kansas Livestock Association and our over 5,700 members across the state. Our members are heavily impacted by these wind towers. A lot of our members have entered into contracts for these, but a lot of them are the surrounding and adjacent landowners who are then impacted by the blinking light, as we've seen a couple of times today. Our members adopted policy, therefore be it resolved, the Kansas Livestock Association supports legislation to protect the private property rights of landowners adjoining but not participating in wind farm developments. One of the more common complaints that we received are about the bright blinking synchronized lights. I won't go too much into that because I think we've heard a lot about that today, and I'll keep it brief. But you will see on my third page of testimony, I did also, I think Senator Peck might have stole my thunder earlier, but I did bring an amendment. It's the same type of amendment that he brought, but instead of adding in something that would be within 2 years, we actually incorporated within the shorter of 5 years after the effective date of this act, and then it goes into the regular language 6 months after the execution of a new power offtake agreement. This is honestly in direct result to complaints from our members. You saw one of them here today. Representative Mosier is a member of KLA. Her husband's a past president of KLA, and our members are seeing this impact. We're very supportive of this bill, and we certainly appreciate what it does for our members. But 20 years on Irish Creek is a very long time. So we would like to set something a little shorter than that. I understand the cost constraints that have been talked about, but I simply think our members are more comfortable putting that burden on, as Senator Peck said, multi-billion-dollar corporations, as opposed to our individual members, the individuals in the community, and the counties that are just trying to keep their constituents happy as well. So with that, I won't take up any more of your time, and I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you for being here. Is there anyone else here that wishes to speak on the proponent side? We do have a written only from Gaylor Rendell as a consumer. On the neutral side, we have a Joel Skelly with KDOT.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'll keep it brief, although I do have to note that while the room is very familiar and several faces are familiar, this is the first time I get to testify in front of the House Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications. So grateful for that opportunity, I think I could say. But I do want to point out a few things. This is outside of our wheelhouse a bit in KDOT. We don't deal with wind energy utilities. We would suggest that we don't really have a logical nexus, in a sense, to this bill as a repository or an agency where to file notice with this. We don't have any concerns with the bill overall, just the concern that we're listed there. We want to make sure that if we are listed or if an agency is listed, to take notice that it makes sense for people to know where to go. And as I'd mentioned, KDOT really doesn't have a logical nexus to the wind energy group or utility industry. I would point out that it has been mentioned a few different times about FAA and their regulatory authority. While we do interact a little bit with FAA, we do not have any regulatory authority that's delegated to us, nor do we really interact much with the FAA. So that piece, I want to make sure that you all understand. I think Senator Peck had mentioned that we might have some authority to allow some flexibility. We do not. There is no flexibility that we can provide with any of this. As it's listed right now, we would essentially be a repository for these notices. And as I'd mentioned before, for a community member or someone like that that's looking at this might not be the logical place that they would go to look for that notice. There's also no other real reason ultimately to come to KDOT for that. So I just wanted to point that out. We're happy to work and continue to work with stakeholders and the committee to possibly find an agency that may make more sense if that's necessary or if that's an interest. Again, North Dakota example, the Utility Commission, it sounded like, as the reviser mentioned, is the agency that kind of there in that state does that. Again, I'm not exactly sure, but this is kind of where we stand with it, and happy to stand for any questions.
Right. Committee, any questions for Mr. Skelly? Not seeing any. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Is there any other neutral testimonies that would like to speak? Not seeing any. Do we have any opponents? All right. With that, I am going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 49. Thank you, everybody, for your testimonies. We're going to try and get through these. We'll see how it goes. So be flexible with me. Next up is a hearing on Senate Resolution 1603. Could I get Nick to go up and explain the resolution?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. This is Senate Concurrent Resolution 1603. Concurrent resolutions are typically urging a statement by the legislature, and concurrent resolutions can be follow the same process as a bill. So committees can amend it. They can be amended on the floor, etc. So this Senate Concurrent Resolution 1603 urges the President of the United States to stop importing all oil, gas, and biofuels from America's adversaries, to reject unscientific environmental mandates that restrict domestic energy production and raises costs upon families, urges the President to support policies that ensure our long-term energy affordability, security, leadership, and progress, including investments in domestic refineries and natural gas production. It encourages the President to expand domestic energy production and ensure energy reliability and affordability for customers, to reevaluate energy policies that have curtailed domestic energy production, and then lastly, to utilize America's abundance of natural resources and its relationships with allies as a leverage against the Russian regime. And Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Maybe any questions for the reviser? Seeing none, looks like we have 3 proponents, 2 of which are written only. Two of which are written only, one from Michael Austin, Americans for Prosperity, and another one from Ed Cross with Cuyahoga. So here in person, we have Senator Mike Fagg. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee, for hearing this. I'm on the Utilities Committee, and I know that the air has been blowing for an hour and a half in here. So I think the story to this is you can read that resolution. And what we're hoping from the Senate side that we can work together in this area, this being a concurrent resolution. And I think it speaks for itself with what's there. What I wanted to do is spend just a minute for talking about what gas and oil does for Kansas. The oil and gas industry generates almost $3.6 billion for production output. There's over 100,000 jobs across Kansas. That provides $3 billion in family income. Today, 89 out of 105 Kansas counties produce oil, and in several Kansas counties, the oil and gas industry represents a quarter of the jobs and 60 to 70% of the property tax collected. So when you look at statewide, oil and gas severance taxes total $65 million, property taxes on oil and gas total of $59 million. So you're talking 125 million collected in 2022. And on the refinery end, in the last 50 years, there hasn't been any new refineries built in the United States. And the last one was like, and I say 50 years, is in 1982. And at that time, there was like 301 operating refineries. Today, there's 125. And 3 of those refineries call Kansas home. They're in Coffeyville, McPherson, and El Dorado. And I can tell you those communities understand the importance. They're good neighbors. I've sat on the advisory council. I know the one for El Dorado for years. I know how they take safety and issues for the community very seriously. So kind of with that, I would say that the other thing I'd like to throw into that is oil over the years, like World War I. A lot of the oil come from Kansas that fought in the war more than we realize. And I kind of bring that up because we need to pat them on the back. And when we look at utilities, it's a diversification. And on the diversification side, today we live in a complex world. So you got regulations and mandates on one side, you got subsidies on the other. And I think it's important we stand up for a very viable industry for our state to make sure that we're in that mix. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, committee, do you have any questions for Senator Fagg? Representative Chuck Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator. You know, on that first one, Senator, it says stop buying oil from American adversaries. I would go even a step farther and say, why do we buy oil? Because we have enough in this country just to do our own. So why are we buying from anybody? So, but I do appreciate the whole resolution. But again, America's not using all that we can. I don't know why we don't use our own instead of buying from anybody. So thank you.
Okay. Do you wish to comment on that?
Just one quick thing I wanted to throw at this too. I forgot. We had 28 senators that sponsored this. So I want to make sure that you understood that. We also had, when we got ready to vote, we had one that didn't, but voted in favor of it and gave us a reason. So I want to make sure that you understood what was happening over on the Senate side.
All right. Senator, I'm sorry. Representative Schleen-Siepen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious here in line 25, what's the definition of an unscientific environmental mandate?
Mr. Chairman, I would take it that there is issues out there, the lesser prairie chicken, you can sit down and get into that. That would be an example for that how complex that can be.
Any other questions? All right. With that, we appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
And I am showing no neutrals or no opponents on this. Anybody else wish to speak for it? With that, I will close the hearing on Senate Concurrent Resolution 1603. And we are going to take up a final action on Senate Bill 144. So we will open that for consideration. I call upon the reviser to describe the bill to us. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, committee, real fast, Senate Bill 144 amends the definition of video service in the Video Competition Act, and it exempts certain providers from the requirements of the Video Competition Act. So, providers of direct-to-home satellite services that do not use the public right-of-way would be exempt from the act, in addition to providers of video programming accessed over the internet, essentially accessed over the internet, including streaming providers. Would be exempt from the act. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Before we do that, there's been a lot of feedback that I have gotten on this one. So really, before we dive into that, we've heard testimony from various municipalities concerning satellites and right-of-ways. So it really made me think more and more of the cable industry. So I'm asking, do we have anyone here prior to diving into this bill from the Kansas Cable Association that would like to speak? Mr. Federico, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. John Federico, Kansas Cable Telecommunications Association. Uh, I want to, I'm not looking for special treatment. When we first became aware of this amendment that's concerning to us as an industry, and I think the proponents of the bill expressed the same concerns, it was beyond the time that I could stand up and weigh in on it. This is an issue, this bill. Last year was a different number, it was a Senate bill, but it's been around for 2 years. And as an industry, we have negotiated with it. Quite honestly, we oppose this bill every step of the way. And we finally came to some agreement where we as an industry would be neutral on the bill with the understanding that there would be no amendments and everything would unravel after that. So there's just a couple of concerns. And what I'm trying to do is be helpful given the time and not really stand up here and lobby you. But what's concerning is the process by which this amendment came around, the language itself. And then when two people give their word in this building, it has meaning. And that's what we did to Dish and Dish did to us in an effort to move forward. Again, we first became aware of this at 11:35 the day before the hearing. And it came as a complete surprise. And some of the justification that we've heard is that this is a backdoor way for cable companies to not pay franchise fees. And we scratch our head. We sent it immediately up the food chain to telecommunication lawyers from our industry, and they were in dispute as to what the language does. So it created a lot of confusion on top of the concern we had about getting it so late. We as an industry were quite visible last year as oral opponents to the bill. So they knew where we were, but yet we weren't given much notice on this. The amendment wasn't offered last year. The amendment wasn't offered on the Senate side during hearings on 144 and only came at the very last minute before the hearings. So process is concerned. What it does, we're not quite sure. I think what they're attempting to do, I made a promise to Representative Turner, I would reach out to our folks saying, take another look at it. I mean, no one wants a fight up here, but what does it do? The same confusion exists. This is what they did say, though. The language that Cox added to the bill was to do nothing more than to ensure that those in the right of way will continue to pay. The goal was to ensure any use of the right of way would require a payment, including if Dish decided to put stuff in the right of way, excluding streaming. And as you heard from the revisor, as he walked you through the bill, it said nothing about cable companies being allowed to avail themselves of this. So I'll close on what I said. We came to an agreement and we're sticking to it. There are things in here we don't like that we'd like to change. But we're as they testified and as we agreed to in our neutrality, we would ask that you not support this amendment at this late hour.
All right. Thank you for your input. Do we have any questions for the revisor or Nick? Anyone at this point in time? Okay. Committee, the floor is now open for discussion on Senate Bill 144. Discussion or amendments? Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you may have heard in the previous discussion, I would like to propose an amendment.
While Nick is passing out, would you like to describe? Or you want Nick to? That's fine.
Okay, so I think folks have got a copy of the amendment. So basically, this was brought to the committee. As we heard in testimony, there's a city in southeast Missouri that is starting to expand maybe the concept of a franchise tax to services that
come like streaming, like Netflix. I think there were questions about Disney Plus and some other things that we like to have for entertainment, and how those things might be subject to franchise taxes under the Video Competition Act. So the merits of that is going through the courts. We heard that in testimony. So that leaves the bringers of this bill to say the intent of this bill is to exempt satellite providers and streaming services from the Video Competition Act, which basically would make it very clear that those particular services are not subject to franchise tax, just for purposes of conversation. So to accomplish that, there were two pieces added to it, and that's what's on the back of the handout that was given here. There was some clarifying language in J, and then there were two pieces, numbers 2 and 3, that are in italics on the handout. Basically, 2 is covering the satellite services and makes clear by ending with some language that says, that these things are provided without using or accessing any portion of the public right-of-way. So the amendment proposed is to add parallel language, just like my English teacher taught me in school, parallel sentences, right? So to add parallel language that equally and clearly defines number 3, that if you are a provider, that you don't get this exemption purely because of this, if you are also a provider and the owner of a cable in the right of way. So anyway, with that, I will stand for questions. I move my amendment.
So I was just getting ready to check online, but is wireline facilities defined? It's not defined in the bill. Is it a defined term within statutes currently? Yeah.
As you noted, I don't believe it's specifically defined in the Video Competition Act, but it is a term that is used in statute. I think maybe 12 different statutes to reference wireline facilities located in a public right of way. So it's probably an industry recognized term.
Is it a telecommunications or other providers that are located in the right of way? Is it interchangeable between, say, I don't know, say electric or there's cable, there's fiber and all that?
I think typically statute, and I'll look again, discusses it in the context of a telecom or a video service provider's line within the right of way.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Proctor, question.
Question for the bringer of the amendment. So if Netflix is being watched through cable internet, it would be subject to the fee for the use of the right of way. Is that what this does?
No, not at all. But if Spectrum, who is currently the provider of the cable through which the internet comes, decides to get into the business of providing content, which basically I'm using content that here it's called video programming in the bill, then they would be subject to the exemption. As they now fall under number 3, they would be a provider of video programming. But that exemption, the additional language is just clarify that they also own that cable in the trench, and therefore this exemption does not apply to them. Do you follow? If that's a Spectrum cable and they get into, if they get into the business that is exempted by number 3, this language just says, but you are not exempted if you own that actual right-of-way asset.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, Representative Turner,
I would like to move my.
Okay, Representative Turner, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I'm sorry. Procedurally, I would like to move my amendment.
So sorry.
For discussion, and
do we have a second? Representative Penn,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. We were still on discussion. You didn't see me.
We're looking for a second at this point. Are you the person? Okay, do we have a second?
Second for discussion, so that we can move on.
All right. Let the minutes reflect Mr. Berquist a second. Now, do we have further discussion on this? Representative Schlangensieben.
You know, I feel like when a group of people get together to negotiate something and they arrive at something, and then all of a sudden we're playing with this in ways that could abrogate the agreements they've come to, I think that's highly problematic. Um, you know, one can always revisit this down the road if there's some major problem that comes up, but I feel kind of short-sighted by this. And I think whenever the varying parties get together to do something, we ought to honor that and not be dealing with amendments whose implications we don't have really the time to think about. I would argue against any amendment to this, that we pass a clean bill.
Okay. Further questions? Representative Penn.
In the spirit of bipartisanship, Representative, couldn't agree with you more. I think integrity matters. I built my life over 20 years in the military, actually having integrity, looking somebody in the eye and saying what I mean and meaning what I say. And your word is your bond. And when you send people to the negotiation table, as we've done in this committee time and time again, to have them hammer out exactly what it is that their proposed and agreed upon solution is going to be when it comes before us, with their good auspices on top of that, I think that means something. And I think it's something that we ought to honor. It's my understanding that my particular municipality jumped in on the last second with a phone call in the middle of the night to help support this as well. And they don't know what it is about either. Just like no one on this panel who's been ambushed by it knows what it's about either. So I would not be in support of any amendments on this bill. They've negotiated in good faith. They've negotiated fairly. They've come up with their solution. And I think that's something that we should uphold, especially when we don't understand the impact. As the carrier of the amendment or the bringer of the amendment said, this is what could happen. Sounds to me like it's a solution in search of a problem, chasing after a ghost. And I would not be in support of this amendment. I encourage other colleagues to be the same.
Further discussion on the amendment? Absolutely. Representative Turner.
Thank you. I don't think I think contract language has meaning. I mean, I did barely pass my contract law in college, but language and words in contracts or in statutes do have an impact. And I think if you leave something open-ended, it's kind of interesting to say that that's a solution in search of a problem. I think it's our job as legislators to look at things, to consider all inputs, and to, do the best we can to craft legislation from it as best we can. To the other point, I would say, yes, there were folks in the negotiation, but it was asked as we had the hearing, where it was everybody that is involved in this, in those negotiations, and the cities were not. And that was asked by my colleague on the right side here. So I would just say that to those points. Completely respect. Yeah, we send people off in a conference, but just as we did with a recent bill, had we sent two of those parties and left one of them out, then we might have had a problem with getting that through. But thank you.
Representative Penn.
Thank you for the second time. I just would, and I appreciate those comments. The League of Municipalities, who covers all of the municipalities, they were involved in the negotiation. So the housing that Wichita OP and everybody had, they were represented within that body. They're part of that body as well. So they're in support of the clean bill as well. I would just remedy that.
Further discussion, Representative Berquist.
Yes. In respect to the input that's been put in the committee after the presentation of this amendment, I will not be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Any further discussion? With that, committee, you've heard the amendment by Representative Turner. Those in, you may close. My bad.
All right. Thank you, and I appreciate the comments. I do think it's a worthwhile amendment. I gave it a lot of thought. I do think that it clarifies the limits of the exemption without impacting the stated intent of the bill, and I haven't heard anyone give comments or defeat the amendment by virtue of the merits of the actual amendment, as opposed to process and other concerns and requests. But anyway, with that, I move my amendment. Thank you.
You've heard the amendment from Representative Turner. Those in favor, please reply by aye. Those opposed? No. Noes appear to have it. Noes do have it. and the amendment is defeated. Is there any additional amendments for this bill? Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not seeing any additional hands go up for amendments, I would move that we pass out Senate Bill 144 favorably.
I'm sorry, who seconded? Minutes would reflect Representative Schlingen-Siepen, sorry, as the second. Okay. Committee, you've heard the motion. Those in favor, please respond by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The bill is passed out favorably. With that, I apologize for keeping everybody late. We are concluded.